Good evening, everyone. We are going to call tonight's public meeting to order. We're going to begin with the approval of our agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda, please? Councillor McIntosh and Councillor Stevens, all in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Any disclosures of direct or indirect pecuniary interest? Seeing none. We had no closed session today, so we will move into the singing of our national anthem. I would ask that you rise if you're able.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
We would like to acknowledge the treaty lands and territory of the Williams Treaty Nations and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We also recognize that Dufferin County is the traditional territory of the Wendat and the Haudenosaunee and is home to many Indigenous people today. Tonight's meeting is being aired on public television and or streamed live and may be taped for later public broadcast or webcast. Your name is part of the public record and will be included in the minutes of this meeting. Any member of the public connecting via telephone is reminded to press *6 to mute and unmute. Please remain muted until the chair requests comments or questions from the public. Tonight is a statutory public meeting, and with that, I will turn the chair over to Deputy Mayor Taylor.
Thank you very much, Mayor Post. Welcome, everyone. Tonight, I will outline the procedures to be followed. Anyone who would like to speak to this matter can call 1-289-801-5774 and enter conference ID 156-777-391, #. Callers will be invited to provide their questions or comments following the conclusion of the meeting presentation. Any member of the public connecting via telephone is reminded to press *6 to mute and unmute. And anyone who wants to be notified of further consideration of this topic to submit their name, phone number, mailing address, and email address to Clerk's Department at orangeville.ca or call 519-941-0440 extension 2442 and reference 2024 Development Charges Background Study PM 20224-001. Any information collected is a matter of public record. So at this time, we'll call forward Nancy Neal, who's the manager of Watson and Associates. And just before Ms. Neal speaks to council, we have a request to increase the time for Ms. Neal's presentation. She should receive 5 minutes. She's been asking for 30 minutes, and we should have a quick discussion about that before we go. Would anyone like to make a motion to that or speak to that? You don't want to speak to it, you just want to make the motion? So why I say is 30 minutes is quite a bit more than we would normally do, right? So is there any thoughts on that, or just want to go ahead and approve 30 minutes? Pardon me? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so did you want to make that motion, Councillor Sherwood? Okay. Okay, Councillor McIntosh will second it. Thank you very much, Rick. I know you were going to do that as well. All in favor of that? Okay, very good. Welcome, Ms. Neal. So you have up to 30 minutes, and thank you very much in advance for being here. The floor is yours.
Just jump in for a minute.
Sure.
I just want to jump in and thank council for their indulgence in that. And I would just point that this meeting is different from a regular council meeting. It's basically the singular meeting for this, the singular purpose for this meeting, although we have added the kite bylaw, is for this particular topic. Most council meetings, we have numerous things on it. We've called you together. It's a public meeting specific for this one topic. So we appreciate the support allowing staff and our expert the time necessary to do it justice.
Thank you, CAO Smith. I just wanted to share that, it is different, and I just wanted council to be aware of that before we went forward. So thank you for your commentary. Ms. Neal, so over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Post and members of council. I will try and get through this as quickly as possible, but I know that it is a different kind of topic than what you might see on a regular basis. It does only come up so many, once every 5 years approximately. So, and there has been a lot of changes. So the legislation required for what we have to undertake as part of the background study. So we want to make sure that you understand fully what's embraced in the study and what's before you, because we do need to go through that process. You won't be making decisions tonight. We'll be back later to actually go through bylaw passage, which will be a much quicker meeting at that point. But we do want to extend the ability for yourself and the public to fully understand what's in the background study. Is it shared already or? Okay. There we go. Perfect. So as noted, the Development Charges Act requires us to hold a mandatory public meeting. That is what we're here for tonight. Prior to this meeting, there were legislative requirements for public notice that have been met. The background study had to be made available at least 2 weeks prior to tonight. That study was made available on August 8th, so we are in plenty of time for that. The study also has to be out in the public realm for a minimum of 60 days prior to you considering and passing a new development charge bylaw. The public meeting is just to review and get the public input. If there is refinements that need to happen to the study between now and that public or that bylaw passage night, we can still make those refinements. To give you an overview of what we've been going through with staff for months now, we began this study earlier in the year, and through till the summertime, we were reviewing all of the necessary background data on the growth forecast that's anticipated, the calculations that we have to undertake for historical service standard maximum ceilings that we'll chat about, come up with the capital needs and the projects to meet those needs over the forecast period to service growth as the town grows, both with residential and non-residential development. We did have to issue an addendum report last week to correct an error we found. And tonight we're here for the public meeting. Again, we'll be back in October, on October 7th for bylaw passage. And at the moment, it is anticipated that the new bylaw will take effect the day after passage. So the purpose of development charges is really to collect capital costs that are incremental costs over and above what you have now in place for assets that service the community. The growth-related costs for capital are those associated with the needs for both residential and non-residential growth. You are, as a municipality, empowered to collect what you can through the Development Charges Act versus other funding tools that the province makes available. However, there are limitations on what you can recover for. The capital costs that we include in the calculations are those that are in addition to what we call local services. So if you think of a subdivision, for example, a developer will be required as their local responsibility to do the internal roads and sidewalks, street lights, water and wastewater mains under those roads, etc. That is only required for that development and therefore doesn't go into the development charge. That is a requirement of their subdivision agreement for conditions of that agreement. What we put in the development charge are projects that have a broader base benefit to all growth throughout the municipality versus just to one specific development itself. The growth that we're looking at, we've looked at two different timeframes depending on the service that we're looking at. Most of the services are looked at over a 10-year planning horizon. However, with your water and wastewater and some of your other services, we've looked out further. As long as we can identify the growth needs for an amount of growth, we can go out any period for all the services except transit. Transit services, we are limited to only looking at the next 10 years. But often, if all you have identified is 10 years worth of needs to service growth, that's what we've embraced. Over the forecast period, we're looking at a net population increase in the next 10 years of just over 25 additional people. And over that longer term horizon, which we call build out, we're looking that 2,500 grows to almost 5,100 additional people. That in the 10 years, we're looking at a mix of housing, both low, medium, and high density of about 1,250 units. And as we continue out, you're almost adding 2,600 additional residential units to the town. On the non-residential side, the major sectors are, of course, industrial, commercial, and institutional that you would impose a charge on. We're looking at, in the 10-year forecast, just over 400 additional employees, and they would be housed in buildings of almost 361,000 square feet. Over the longer horizon, that additional employment growth grows to 772 additional employees, and they would be housed in almost 687,000 square feet of new buildings. Just as a background to look at the housing starts that you've had, you can see in this chart that over the last 10 years, which is on the left-hand side in the black, obviously some years they fluctuate up and down. However, you have been averaging about 75 units a year in the past. We are anticipating, based on the knowledge we have and the forecasts that you have, an uptick in that going forward with approximately 121 units a year. You can see the different mix with the low density, which are single and semi-detached homes, medium density, which are things such as townhouses and row houses, and the high density being your apartments. That is the mix of housing. Again, in any given year, it will fluctuate over time. We've averaged it for the purposes of our calculations. In addition to sort of the municipal-wide development charges, there are some of those localized works that have historically been recovered through an area-specific development charge. That often happens when some of those localized works benefit more than just one developer, and because of cost sharing or financing, maybe the first developer in couldn't afford to build all of the infrastructure. So there's been historic area-specific development charges. They would be in addition to the municipal-wide charges, and they continue until such time as each of those areas are actually fully built out, and the costs associated with those localized works are fully paid for. There are residential as well as industrial, commercial, and institutional properties that all contribute to some or all of those localized works. They are calculated a little differently because we calculate them on a area basis, depending on the net developable hectares in each of those development areas. So it's not on a per unit basis or per square foot or square meter basis, such as the town-wide charges. They are on an area charge. For the town-wide services and classes of services, what we've looked at, including in the calculations, are services related to a highway, which is your roads and related infrastructure, including fleet, equipment, and public works facilities, to house those services with operations, transit services, fire protection, policing, parks and recreation services, library, and then our last item there is a growth-related studies class of service. So growth-related studies that pertain to any of those eligible services, as well as studies such as the development charge study itself, your official plan updates, other planning type studies that need to happen. Those are all encapsulated in that growth-related studies class of service category. On a sort of area specific, but more urban area specific, we look at water, wastewater, stormwater, and roads. Those are the ones that we are looking at including for the area specific charges on the net hectare basis. So those are more the localized works that are included. There are urban specific services that have a broader base benefit as well that's only charged to the urban area. So if you were on a well or septic in a rural area, you wouldn't be imposed those components of the charges. Oops. Yep. I know this slide is very busy. There's a lot of numbers there, but really when you break down everything that we've included in the calculations, there's about $217 million worth of capital works in total that need to take place. Now, some of those costs will benefit growth in that post period or post 10-year or build out period. So we have more costs identified than we do have growth in our calculations. Those we call post period deductions. They are still growth related and will work their way into future development charges. As more growth gets added into the calculation, those costs will also be recovered in future development charges. We do have a few other deductions on the studies because some of the studies relate to services that are DC ineligible for collection. Still growth related, but because it's an ineligible service, you can't recover it through development charges. Those costs you have to fund from some other source. As well, we then have about $86.5 million that benefits the existing community. So quite often, a lot of the projects will be replacing and expanding something. The replacement component is already there today for your existing community and therefore is considered asset management life cycle replacement. That you cannot charge to future growth. So it's only that incremental cost that we include in the calculations. There are also some grant subsidies and other contributions on some projects that are anticipated of about $13 million. And when we make all of those required deductions, what we've included in the calculations is approximately $99 million in total. Now, with that, we allocate based on the residential growth versus the non-residential growth. And so you can see the majority of those costs are going to benefit the population growth. That's about $85.4 million, with about $13.6 million that will benefit the non-residential growth over the forecast periods. What that calculates for an actual rate for those municipal-wide services, a single detached or semi-detached home would be paying $29,473. If they are in the urban serviced area, the water, wastewater, stormwater charges are in addition to that. So in the urban area, the total charge would be $49,533. You can see as we move to the right on the residential, the smaller the unit, the lower the charge. So multiples such as townhouses in the urban area would be paying $40,901, and then apartments with 2 or more bedrooms would be paying $31,220. Apartments that are 1 bedroom or bachelors would be paying $17,233. And then you'll notice there's also what we call a special care special dwelling unit rate. That is for such developments as a retirement home, long-term care home, hospice, or group home. Those types of units typically have 1 or 1.1 persons per unit in them, and so we charge them an even lower rate per unit at $16,448. On the non-residential side, the municipal-wide with the urban serviced areas would be $16.56 per square foot. In addition to that, depending on the localized works for those area-specific charges for roads, water, wastewater, and stormwater, some developments may also have to pay, in addition to the municipal-wide charges, the area-specific charges. And those, again, are for those localized works that normally the developer would have done at 100% their costs, but they're cost-sharing them. And really, the municipality is acting as a collection agency to collect it and make sure it all gets paid and put in place for those developments that all benefit. There's different areas that benefit from each of these projects. So based on the development that someone's building in, they may or may not have to pay a component of these charges in addition. For those municipal-wide charges, a comparison to where your current rates are for a single or semi-detached home, right now the rate is $29,947. That is what is calculated to increase to the $49,533. As well, the current non-residential charge is $10.58 per square foot. You will notice that there's, in the background study, we had identified $13.86. And as I noted, we did notice an error in the calculation. And so we have recalculated and updated through the addendum report, and the proper calculated rate is the $16.66 a square foot. Again, we've given a comparison of the current area-specific charges and the calculated charges. I won't go through those all in detail. They are there and in the background study for those properties that benefit from it. They can see which ones they relate to. To give you an idea of how those your current rates and calculated rates compare to other municipalities in and around Dufferin County and in the areas just south of you, we've put a survey together for those single-family homes. What we've included in here, and you can see the pink line is where your current rates are. The blue line is where the calculated rates are. We've included both the upper tier and lower tier charges, and we've separated out the water wastewater component, because if you go south, for example, to Caledon, they have a split where the region does some of the water wastewater works, the lower tier does some of the other water and wastewater works. So we've tried to isolate the total of those. And then we've also included for those municipalities that are imposed a education development charge, whether that's through the public and or Catholic boards that are in place in those municipalities, a full picture of what somebody would be paying for if they were coming to get a building permit for a single family home. Currently, all in, those costs are $36,010. And then that new calculated rate would be an all-in cost of just under $55,600. You can see as you go south to Caledon and Erin, their charges, Caledon's up almost at $140,000 and Erin's just below $100,000. Grand Valley is almost $82,000 now, and then it goes down from there in other municipalities in Dufferin County. We've given a similar sample or survey of the commercial rates, again with your current rates on that pink line, including the upper tiers, lower tiers, and education charges where they're in place, to show that you'd be going to from a full all-in charge of $6.20 per square foot up to $10.70. That is excluding the water wastewater charges. If you do have the water wastewater charges, you'd be going from a total cost of $11.63 up to $17.62. And again, on the industrial side, currently you fully exempt industrial developments from your charges, and the only thing that is being charged is the county's component of the charge. We have put in the full calculated rate to show where you would increase to if you continue or if you actually pass a full charge. That would go to $17.62. Of course, you do have the option to discount or fully exempt any type or class of development, continuing on with policies, and that's our next step. Over the last 5 years, there have been extensive changes to the Development Charges Act, a lot of which have introduced additional statutory exemptions or discounts that your hands are tied with. You have to provide. Going down that list, the industrial building expansion, if you do impose any component of the industrial charge, this 50% one-time expansion exemption has been there since 1997. And so if I had a 5,000 square foot building, I could increase by 2,500 square foot and you wouldn't charge me. Anything above that 2,500 square feet, you would start imposing that industrial charge if you so choose to put it in. There is residential intensification exemption, so I could expand my home without having to pay. That has been there for years. And then the county, the town, and the school boards, if you are building any facilities, you don't charge each other your own development charges. Those first three have been there for a number of years. What is new over the last 5 years includes a mandatory exemption for up to 2 additional residential units on either an existing home or even at the time of a new home. So if someone comes forward with an application for a single family home, they can also ask for 2 additional units. Could be a basement apartment, and it can even be an ancillary unit such as a garden suite out in the backyard. Those 2 additional units, you cannot impose a development charge on any longer. If someone was to come forward with a 3rd additional unit that they wanted, the 3rd unit or any additional after that would be imposed the charge if your zoning allows for that many additional units to be added to a property. In addition to that, affordable and attainable residential units are exempt. Now, this is something new that actually came in as of June 1st of this year and overrode your existing bylaw. The affordable residential units have been defined quite specifically for both units that are owned and units that are rented. The ministry has actually issued a bulletin on May 1st of this year that they will update annually, and that bulletin sets out the threshold for which staff will measure against to determine whether or not a home is considered affordable for this exemption. Now, if it is, the developer has to enter into an agreement with the town to guarantee that those units will stay affordable for a minimum of 25 years. The attainable residential unit exemption, although it's in place, needs further definition and prescription. All that it is defined as currently is that it's not an affordable unit and it's not a rental unit. What else it is, we really don't know. We don't know if there's going to be a different threshold set as to what the average purchase price, instead of 90%, it could be 80 or 70. We've heard other rumors that it may be a prefab home or something else, or homes under a certain square footage. We really don't know until it's prescribed. But at any time, the province can prescribe that, and once it is in place, you would have to give those mandatory exemptions as well. In addition to that, if you ever have an inclusionary zoning bylaw and you defined affordable units within that bylaw, those are also exempt, as well as nonprofit housing is exempt. Universities or any campus that gets ongoing funding from the province are exempt. And then rental housing gets a discount based on the number of bedrooms in each of the units. And that ranges from 15, 20, or 25%. There are also some rules regarding site plan and rezoning applications where the rate is frozen at the day of application. And then from the date of approval of that application, the building permit has to be pulled within either 18 months or 2 years, depending on the date of that approval, and they get the old rate. You can apply interest to that at a prescribed maximum rate. And institutional and rental housing also get to pay their development charge in installments with 6 equal installments, with the first one not due at building permit issuance, but at occupancy permit. And then every year after that. In addition to all those statutory exemptions, you have the ability to provide a discount or exemption to other types of developments. Currently, what we have in the draft bylaw is that you give a full exemption for lands used in connection with churchyards, cemeteries, burial grounds, as well as a partial exemption of 50% for the place of worship for the portion that is for worship, and that you also provide a redevelopment credit for up to 24 months. So if you demolish your home, you can replace it within a certain period without having to pay a development charge. Next steps, this is my last slide. We do want to hear any questions from the public or council tonight, and then we will refine the background study calculations and/or policies to bring forth for that October 7th consideration of bylaw passage. And as mentioned early on, we're looking at an implementation date of October 8th for the new rates. That is my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions that you have.
Very good. Thank you very much, Ms. Neal. So at this time, we will go to the public, okay? Council will be after the public. So if there's any questions or comments from the public regarding this matter, any members of the public on the phone is reminded to press *6. Jerry, do you want to start with the phone? Is there anyone online? No? We're good? Okay. Members in the gallery? Yes, Mr. Toms, if you could come forward. Can you pull your mic up, sir? Thank you.
Apologies.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Yeah, the only question I really have out of this is that I wonder whether the development charges for the residential would cover the likes of sound barriers, privacy type barriers and so on, specifically between multi-type dwellings, townhouses, and so on, and residential areas where there's a need to provide some sort of appropriate barrier in the form of sound and privacy.
Very good. Ms. Neal, did you want to take that?
It depends where they are. If they are located on private property, then and it's an adjacent development that's happening, the town may be able to require that as part of a condition of the development agreement. If the sound barrier, for example, is along a roadway where there's going to be increased traffic and the municipality is expanding that roadway, then that sound barrier fencing for that could be part of the capital costs of expanding that roadway or upgrading it because of the additional traffic volumes. So it depends if it's on a municipal land or if it's on private property.
Okay, let's assume then for a moment it's strictly on private property. A barrier between the multi-dwelling buildings, i.e. townhouses, and separate individual housing.
Ms. Neal?
Yeah, through the chair again. Almost to planning staff to determine whether or not that is something that they would require that developer to put in place as a requirement of that development. That is not something that is on town property that would go into the development.
Very good. Mr. Koslak would like to speak to that.
Through you, Deputy Mayor. Typically, when it's required for a developer, the developer would be required to do it. If, for example, there's a new development coming that has noise implications, they'd be required as part of their site plan agreement to install noise fences at their perimeter.
Right. This is okay, except that when I've sat in this council chamber some years ago now where there was an agreement to put privacy fences in, and that hasn't happened. And now the residents are very upset because those fences don't seem to be forthcoming.
Mr. Kosak, do you want?
Oh, through your worship, I'm not familiar with the location you're talking about. Maybe we can talk
I
after.
certainly specifically can mention to you that this is Sunset and the
So, Mr. Tom, I
townhouse
think-
development on First Street.
What we're trying to do tonight is talk about a bylaw that's going to come in. If
Right.
you've got something specific, we'd be happy to take that offline with you.
Right, yeah, that's fine. I first I wanted to know whether or not development charges would, that's the reason for the initial question,
Okay.
would
very
be
good.
be able to cover that sort of situation.
Well, why don't we touch base after the meeting?
Fine.
Mr. Smith, did you want to speak to this item as well?
I was just going to say two things. I think Ms. Neal answered the question specific to development charges, which is why we're here tonight.
Yeah.
The property, Mr. Tom is referencing specifically would be best dealt offline. I am familiar with it. The site plan agreement does call for privacy fence on a small portion of the development, but not on the remaining portion of the development. And that has caused some confusion with the local residents. I've actually been on site with residents. So we'd be happy to speak with him offline.
Very good.
Good enough.
Sound good?
Yeah,
Okay.
super.
Thank you, sir. Okay, members of council, I think Councillor Andrews was first and then Councillor McIntosh. So go ahead, Councillor Andrews.
So thank you, Chair Taylor, and again, thank you for your leadership in tonight's public meeting. Ms. Neal, thank you also for the report. Like all of us on council, a lot to read, a lot of information, but I want to hone in on a couple of things, one of which I'm the chair of the newly formed town's Affordable Housing, Attainable Housing Task Force. So it really caught my ear and eyes when I saw the clarity. It really helps to provide an understanding of the exemptions. I think the complexity is, in fact, for the general public to understand what opportunities they have here. And you do outline somewhat of a communications plan that is in this report as well, which I'm hoping that will certainly come to fruition. In the original council document on page 54, there is that running scale that you had highlighted of 121 units per calendar year for the next number of years. How did you come up with that calculation? Because again, there's ebbs and flows to what is and has transpired within the building sector. We take a look at some announcements that were made just today by the federal government, some optimism there on, the opportunity for higher priced homes to be from a mortgage perspective and the length of a mortgage. But I'd like to just hear your take on the calculation and how you were able to provide that.
Ms. Neal?
We also look at prior development charge studies. We look at actual growth that has taken place. We also look at the applications that are in the planning process and working with staff try and project out how much growth is going to happen in the various forecasts that we have included in. The mix of housing, again, some historical, but also to meet population targets that you need to with what's in the planning process. All of that is taken into consideration when we determine approximately how many units are going to take place over a 10-year period or that longer period.
Councillor Andrews, you good with that? Councillor McIntosh?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. I actually understood quite a bit of it, so kudos. My question is more specific. Our fire station was built in 1972, and obviously things have changed since then. Would that new building be covered under some of these costs?
If you were replacing and expanding station again, until it did, that we would embrace it here, size of the benefit to it because it already exists and for that many. I mean, if you want me to look at the projects and what we've included in here, give me a minute. But we always look at just the state and outfitting.
Anything further, Councillor Mack?
No, thank you. It sounds to me like you're saying yes for some of it. So thank you.
Very good. Mr. Smith?
Yeah, and thank you. And I don't normally speak this much.
It's a treat.
The question is a great question, and the answer was a great answer. And I will just say it also depends on the final built form. If we end up building a fire hall that matches what we've got with same capacity, then it's probably not eligible for development charges. But if it's a bigger facility designed for future growth and future needs, then it would likely be eligible for development charge.
Very good. Any further comments or questions from council? Mayor Post.
Thank you very much and appreciate your presentation. And the report was extensive, and I may have missed something in the presentation, but the one item that I'm wondering about is at what point in the planning process is the developer allocated how much they're paying in development charges? And I ask that because if we've got, for example, a developer who has an approved plan that has sat untouched for a number of years, are they grandfathered into paying the lower development charges based on that approval, even though they haven't built within a reasonable amount of time? And now, we're significantly increasing based on that growth. How does that work?
Ms. Neal?
Through the chair. The application type. So if it is a subdivision, there is no grandfathering unless you as a council decide to grandfather the units that are left in there. And that you can do if you wish to. If it is going through site plan or rezoning application, then the rates are frozen. And there's two different periods in there. So any application that was received between January 1st, 2020 and June 6th of this year, if that was received and approved in that time period, then the rate was frozen on the day of application. And they get 2 years from the day that application was approved, pull their building permit, and they pay the rate that was in effect on the day they applied. If they didn't receive approval for June 6th of this year, that 2-year window between approval and building permit issuance reduces from 2 years to 18. And that's a change that happened in the legislation this June.
Very good. Thank you.
Application, subdivision, consent, they pay the rate that's in effect at the time of building permit issuance, except for institutional development and rental housing that pays an occupancy permit. But unless you grandfather something else in, that's what they would pay and when they would pay, and you determine the charge on that date of permit.
Perfect. That answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Neal. Anything further? Oh, yes, Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, thank you, Chair Taylor. Back when we approved the development charges in our last term of council, I remember specifically putting through a motion to give a reduction in the DCs for anybody building long-term care or nursing homes. That was something in addition to what was proposed that got passed. Was that grandfathered in this? Has there been some legislative changes in order to give those breaks for people that are actually going to be doing those types of developments?
Ms. Neal?
If it is a private bill for profit, then giving a full exemption or partial exemption would be up to you as a discretionary measure and is not mandatorily required. So nonprofit would be fully exempt. For profit, that's up to you as to whether or not you want to discount or exempt them. Right now, we have not embraced that in the proposed bylaw, but it could certainly be added if that is something council wants.
Thank you, Ms. Neal. Any further follow-ups, Councillor Sherwood?
So I guess I should have followed up with staff earlier. How is this going to affect our previous development charges? If I'm trying to think, like, we wanted to continue with that to try and encourage people to come, whether it's for profit or not for profit. We were really trying to encourage long-term care and nursing home facilities for people to build here. So I'm trying to think, like, am I having to put another motion on here to go with status quo as to what we did back the last time, or has that been covered off now? I can't remember what the break is, but I'm really concerned that I want to continue that.
Mr. Smith?
Yeah, thank you very much. We can take that under consideration. And when it comes back for approval, tonight is just a public meeting. You're not making any decision tonight. It wouldn't be, I don't think, appropriate to give us direction to do that without you understanding all of the impact. But we can take that under consideration. When we come back in October with the final report, we can include that option for council's consideration with a summary of the advantages and disadvantages to that.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Councillor Stevens, just want to be respectful. Did you want to add anything to the dance here tonight?
Sure. Thank you. Through you. Under table C2, you have operating and capital expenditures. Sorry. Under policing, you have facilities, equipment, things like that. I thought that would be all included in the overall budget we give the OPP.
Ms. Neal?
Yeah, through the chair. What that table does is it looks at if once all of the capital projects are in place, and you are responsible to provide facility space for policing. Any expansion to that facility space would generate additional operating expenditures to heat, staff it, etc. As well, there'd be asset management requirements. Now, those asset management requirements, along with outfitting of police officers and their vehicles to support them, are through a service contract with OPP. But they have indicated in their service contracts that they are planning on adding and enhancing over the forecast period, additional officers that will be required to service the town as you grow. And so we anticipate that those service contracts will increase with additional officers and fleet and additional facilities to support them. And therefore, we've made an assumption on what your service contract will increase by to help cover those additional operating expenses. The Development Charges Act requires us to turn our mind to operating expenses so that you are not we can't recover them through capital and through the DCs, because you can only recover the capital component of it. But what the province doesn't want you doing is putting assets in place and having them constructed and put there, and then on day one, you can't actually open the doors because you forgot that there's operating impacts to actually do that. So it's a calculation we do to bring to your attention that as you add assets, there will be operating impacts that will have to be funded through taxes and rates and other sources.
Very good. Thank you very much, Ms. Neal. Any further questions or comments? No? Seeing none. I guess just before we go off on this file, the mayor has pointed out to me that Rebecca Medeiros did quite a bit of work on this for our team and our staff, and we'd just like to thank her for all the work that was done on this. So thank you very much to you. So at this time, I will ask that we have a motion to approve. So the motion is written in the agenda that report PM 2024-001-2024 development charges background study be received for information. Can I have a motion to do that? Councillor Andrews, thank you. Mayor Post, thank you. All in favor? Thank you. That's unanimous. And so that moves us off of 8.1 and brings us on to 9.1, which is the proposed kite fighting bylaw, which is 2024-003. And again, before we start, I will outline the procedures that will follow, so please bear with me. Anyone who'd like to speak to this matter is invited to call 289-801-5774, enter conference ID 156-777-391 #. Callers will be invited to provide their questions or comments following the conclusion of this meeting presentation. Any member of the public connecting via telephone is reminded to press *6 to mute and unmute. Anyone who wants to be notified of further consideration of this topic to submit their name, phone number, mailing address, and email address to clerksdepartment@orangeville.ca or call 519-941-0440 extension 2242 and reference proposed kite fighting bylaw PM 2024-003. And please note that any information collected is a matter of the public record. So at this time, I will turn it over to you, Jordan, and you'll have a brief presentation for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Deputy Mayor Taylor, members of council, town staff, and members of the public joining us this evening in person and virtually. I'm here to seek feedback regarding the proposed kite fighting bylaw. To provide you with some of a bit of background on how we got here, in 2023, there was a kite flying festival that was held at the Orangeville Agricultural Society Event Center in Mono. During the August 14th, 2023 council meeting, council passed a notice of motion requesting staff to report back on options to prohibit kite fighting within the town of Orangeville. On August 12th, 2024, staff presented a report to council with 2 options, and council opted for option 2, directing staff to prepare a bylaw. We are here this evening to provide members of the public as well as council with an opportunity to review the proposed bylaw and provide comments and/or feedback to staff prior to the bylaw coming forward to council for their consideration. Town staff are aiming to present the bylaw to council for consideration and passing on October 21st. For those of you who do not know, kite fighting is an activity where 2 or more participants fly kites with the aim of cutting an opponent's kite string. Therefore, the final kite remaining in the air is the winner of the fight. The string used in kite fighting differs from traditional string used for recreational kite flying and is considered hazardous. It can be sharp and made of metal, wire, piano wire, fishing line, or types of nylon string that has been chemically treated or that contains glass fragments. When these strings are in use or not properly disposed of, they can be a risk to health and safety, cause injuries to people, pets, and wildlife, and damage parks and open spaces. The Municipal Act provides various sections of authority for members of council. The 2 sections referenced on the screen, so 11.2 and section 128, provide council with the legislative authority to pass a bylaw to prohibit kite fighting on private and public property. Staff, as mentioned earlier, received council direction on August 12, 2024 through resolution number 2024-140. Council unanimously passed the motion that's on the screen before you. The proposed kite fighting bylaw that's listed on this evening's agenda would be prohibiting persons or groups of persons from engaging in kite fighting on any private property or public property within the town, and the flying of kites with string made of hazardous material on private property or public property within the town. And hazardous material will be defined in the proposed bylaw and was mentioned earlier in this presentation. So what does this mean with respect to enforcement? It's important to note that kite fighting is transient in nature. Therefore, enforcement to this bylaw would be reactive and complaint-based. Finding unattached string improperly disposed of may pose a challenge with being able to conduct enforcement. Enforcement of this bylaw will be by officers, and officers would be defined in the bylaw as police officers, municipal law enforcement officers, general manager, or any other person appointed by bylaw to enforce the provisions of the bylaw, and this may include peace officers, so officers of conservation authorities. Officers will use progressive enforcement measures to enforce any new bylaw that is passed, starting with education and then proceeding to issue charges. So next step, so the proposed bylaw, as mentioned, is attached to the report listed on this evening's agenda. Staff will receive comments from members of council as well as the public and adjust the bylaw if necessary. The bylaw will be before council for consideration on October 21st, and if passed, the bylaw will come into effect immediately. That is the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Very good. Thank you for your report. Jerry, is there anyone on the line at this time? No? Okay, very good. Any member of the public wish to ask a question regarding this? No, seeing none. Any member of council like to speak to this item? Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Taylor. Through you, I see under penalties, section 7, there's a maximum. I'd like to see a minimum. Just not sure how we go about that.
Jordan, did you want to speak to that at all, or any thoughts?
Yes, so with respect to enforcement, we will have to submit to the province short form wordings and set fines. That can be approved by council, and that's how we can set the minimum charges. However, the legislation does stipulate what a maximum charge could be. If council would like to see a minimum charge in the bylaw, I can take that back and work with our enforcement staff to determine what that should be.
Councillor Stevens.
Well, I'd like to see it start at least $1,000 for the first offense. I would think we want to curve this right off the get-go. So I don't know if I can make a motion or no. Okay, but if I'd like to see a minimum of $1,000.
So that would go back to staff to decide, and then that would come back to us for approval at a later time. And duly noted.
Yes, I've noted the comment.
Okay,
thank you.
Very good. Any other commentary, Council? Yes. Councillor McIntosh.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. This isn't really a question. Last time we talked about this in August, somebody in one of our local press got it wrong. They said kite flying. Is there any way we can stress that this is kite fighting, not flying? I don't know if we need to make it in capitals or what we need to do, but anything will be appreciated. Thank you.
Jordan.
Through you, Deputy Mayor Taylor noted about the confusion. Certainly, if the bylaw does get passed by council, it would come into full force and effect immediately, and we will work with our communications staff to develop a strategy to ensure that there's a clear differentiation between traditional kite flying and what would be considered kite fighting.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Any further questions? Oh, Mayor Post.
Thank you very much for this. It's, I think, exactly what we were looking for. The one comment that I do have is I know the town of Mono has recently passed one as well. Is there, and I haven't read theirs, so is there a lot of similarities? I think the one thing that's important is that we have a consistent message across the county. And I think that was, although we don't have a conservation space similar to Island Lake right in the boundaries of the town of Orangeville, I think one of the things that we wanted to really enforce was that we are on side with the town of Mono with their kite fighting regulations, because they are deeply impacted by this. So I think that it's important that there's consistency amongst the bylaws within the county.
Is that a duly noted as well, I think?
Yes.
Yeah.
Through you, Deputy Mayor Taylor, to Mayor Post, they are extremely consistent. I would say the only difference that staff put in the town of Orangeville's proposed bylaws enforcement for peace officers as well.
Very good. Thank you. Any further comments or questions, Council? No, seeing none. We'll look for a motion to pass as written in the agenda that report PM 2024-003 proposed kite fighting bylaw be received for information. Could I have a motion to do that, please? Councillor Sherwood, Councillor Stevens seconds. Any last minute commentary? No, seeing none. All in favor? Yes, that passes unanimously. And at this time, I will turn the chair back over to the very amazing Mayor Post.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor, and thank you for chairing the statutory and non-statutory public meetings. We will move straight into bylaws. The recommendation is that the bylaws listed below be read 3 times and finally passed. A bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of the Town of Orangeville at its council public meeting held on September 16th, 2024. Can I have a motion for the bylaw, please? Councillor Andrews and Deputy Mayor, all in favor? And that's carried unanimously. And finally, a motion to adjourn. Councillor McIntosh and Councillor Stevens, all in favor? And that is carried. Thank you for joining us tonight.